Welcome everyone. Hope you had a good start to your week at the college. My name's Lane. There's probably only a couple of people in here that ever had me as an anatomy and physiology tutor, but that's how I started the college 7.5 years ago. And halfway along the process of being a tutor, a slot came up where I was offered to talk about mind-body stuff. So prior to coming to the college, I was running a body talk clinic. I don't know if anyone knows or practices body talk. No, it's all right. So it's a mind-body system that's leans heavily on Chinese medicine and the understandings they have of how the body works. So the session today is going to be a lot of the theory out of body talk, but particularly what I've done is pull out the information from my main tutor in that, Kaimi, around the connections between mind and body. Because quite often we think of mind-body stuff as a bit floating and airy-fairy and not having a lot of solid grounding. But particularly in the last couple of years, there's an enormous amount of research coming out, particularly around things like ADHD and dysbiosis in the gut. Has anyone read Natasha McBride's book? A couple of nods. That's a really interesting one to have a read. I think I've got it listed in the resources at the back. So what I want to do today is make some of those connections where science is at currently around mind-body connections and look at how they impact on our physical health. Okay. And I'm also recording the session because we're looking at maybe changing around how some of the workshops are done. So it's not going to be recording any of you, it's just going to be over here. Okay. So the aim of this really is to hopefully give you reason to pause and reflect on the cause of illness and the links, the mind-body health stuff. At its simplest form for the sort of thing that you're studying, it will be around compulsive eating. What are people trying to do? What are they trying to receive when they're compulsively eating? And we all do this at times. It's not always the obvious sort of compulsive eating. So hopefully give you a reason to reflect on the linkages between mind, body and how that might impact on you working in clinic. So without looking down and reading what it says, what is stress to you? Worried about anything? Everything? Yeah?
Busy.
Busy?
Been really busy, having too much to get done.
Yeah. Parent?
Yep.
Anything else?
Being uptight and
Around anything in particular?
yeah, just time frames and having to get a lot of stuff done and not enough time to do it.
Yep. Anything else jumping up?
Toxins.
Toxins, yes. Pain. So lots of things. When we think about stress, we tend to think about these three. So relationships, work, financial, mental, emotional stress. In Body Talk, the definition of stress is anything that impacts on our body-mind. And you'll see that it's written body-mind, not body and mind, because in that system it really doesn't see that there's any separation between the two. And this is what we're going to investigate a little. Underneath this, we've got other things like the toxins in the environment, nutritional stress, not enough B vitamins while you're stressed, and that impacting on your energy levels. Trauma, so physical stress, but also things like electromagnetic fields. And these, you see one study that says cell phones cause brain cancer, and then you see one that categorically says the other thing. So it's not a solid science at this stage, but there is evidence to show, for example, that guys that keep a cell phone in their pocket have lowered sperm motility. So when you're looking at impact on subtle cells like sperm, there is an impact. So it's these sort of stresses as well, and this is a science that will unfold over the coming years because we haven't been using cell phones that long. Unfortunately, the frequencies they use are getting stronger and stronger each time they upgrade the networks. So to summarise that, it's what our bodies, I should put BodyMind, has to counter to work with to maintain homeostasis. So a neutral balance. So then when we are stressed, when one of these many different things that can stress us causes stress, which body systems shut down? Digestive, really key for what we're learning. There's two other really key ones as well. Who's worked and finally gone on holiday and got sick? So what's happening there? Yeah. So your immune system is heavily impacted by stress. It pretty much shuts it down. And there's another very similar one. Who knows of someone that's tried to get pregnant, tried to get pregnant, given up, gone on holiday, got pregnant? It's quite a common thing. Same thing. So stress shuts down your digestive system, your immune and your reproductive. It impacts on the other ones as well. But those are the three key ones. You know, when you're stressed, the body goes into fight or flight. So it's sending blood and energy into the parts of the body it needs to run or fight and keep safe. So we're keyed into this old archetypal thing. Like animals, and we'll get to the gazelle in a second, but we're in situations that don't need those responses, and it's still triggering us. So it might be, you know, having friction with someone at work, or relationship stress, or financial stress, whatever it is. But it's still causing these old archetypal responses. So in one of my classes, my tutor Kaimi was describing this sort of thing, and he was talking about the differences between human and animals. And he talked about the gazelle. So imagine you're in Africa and there's a big cat, a cheetah or whatever it is, and the gazelle sees it and it sprints as fast as it can for 200 metres, and it knows that the big cat can only sprint for about 100, 150, and its muscles get fatigued and it can't sprint any longer. So the gazelle keeps going for maybe another 100 metres, and it stops over here and it goes, oh, I'm safe, and it starts eating grass. How many of you, after being chased by a big cat, would be able to go and, you know, have some pasta, or whatever it might be? You know, so for an animal, this old mechanism of fight or flight is really, really productive. It keeps them safe. But they also know when it's not required. No, not really in a mindful way, but you know, that's a natural response, and they can shift out of it and they can go back to the behaviour that was going on before that. For us, we might have someone that every time that happens to, every time they see a cheetah on a billboard in a cartoon on TV, for the rest of their life might get a little shunt of adrenaline without even knowing what's going on, because there's old memories of trauma that have been triggered by those images or the sound of a cat or whatever it might be, and causing stress. So we have this higher mind that is obviously very useful in lots of ways, but its connection through to these older archetypal responses means that it can cause some inappropriate responses that aren't very useful for us in the modern day. So we're going to explore that. So as we go, we're going to build up a picture around this. So we've got stress triggered by these sorts of events, or it could be something quite simple like missing the bus. And it's triggering physical changes in the body, particularly the digestive, immune and reproductive. So this is our first place. Now who's heard of Candace Pert? So any molecules of emotion? No, any books that I mention are listed at the back if anyone's interested afterwards to go and read. So back in the 70s, pharmaceutical companies didn't know how drugs worked. They knew they worked, and they hypothesised that they bound to some sort of receptor on the surface of a cell and caused changes to occur inside the cell. Candace Pert was the first person to show this. So at the start of her career, well, I don't know, it was right at the start, but she discovered the opiate receptor. And she had a long scientific career in which, at the end of it, or towards as she progressed through it, she pretty much showed that you can't separate body and mind. And the level she was showing it is the signalling molecules that occur in the body. And we tend to think of stress, brain releasing things, flooding the body having a response. And that is often the way it goes, but she showed that it can also go the other way around. So you know that the tissue that forms your brain when you're in embryo is the same tissue that forms your digestive system. It's all one sort of mass, and it starts to lengthen out and become the nervous system and the digestive system. And because of this common embryology, they've got a lot of neuropeptides and signaling molecules in common. So most of the serotonin, which is a feel-good neurochemical in the brain is actually produced by the gut. Hence our feeling good after eating some nice food. So there's all these connections. These are the sort of things she started to show. And so as an example of this mind-body connection, has anyone ever had this, and I have, where you've got a phone call to say that someone that you're close to has passed away and you just sort of lose strength and plonk down into a seat or something? I had this with my cousin. But what's actually happening there? We've got a concept in the brain that someone has died, causing a very strong physical response. So this is a nice, simple little example of how our mind and body is connected, that they're not separate things. Has anyone heard of Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief? He's a little bit more well known than Candice. He was rewriting the genetics books when I was at Massey, learning the genetics that would be thrown out 10 years later, as science tends to go. You talk the stuff that's here and the research is away, 10 years ahead. So he was the first person to show that if you have a repeated mental emotional state, the receptors on your cell alter how many of them are expressed, so they can upgrade or downgrade. But the really important thing he showed was that when that cell split into two daughter cells, the two daughter cells already had that new response, so that the mental emotional state can get passed through cell lines and alter genetics, so the new daughter cells have a new genetic expression. So Candice and Bruce Lipton were two core scientists that were early on showing this connection. And he was actually doing that in the 80s. And so like I said, I was learning genetics at Massey at 95, I started. And he'd already been doing this work. So there's these early scientists that were starting to do this work, showing directly the connection of mind-body. And just to point out before we move on that it goes the other way around as well. So I mentioned Natasha McBride. She is a doctor and has done a huge amount of work with kids with ADHD. And I haven't actually read her book. But she discovered that most kids, if not all kids with ADHD, have dysbiosis in the gut, so they have the wrong microbes in there, whether that's from stress, antibiotics, genetics, or a combination of lots of different things, toxins. And then if she could heal your gut through fermented foods, through probiotics, prebiotics, changes in diet, most of the ADHD symptoms disappeared. So she's a more recent, well actually she's been doing the work for quite a long time, but she is becoming quite well known, and again is one of these scientists that's shown this body impacting on mind as well as mind to body. And as another little example of this, if you hold a smile and you actually hold it for a minute, it triggers the happiness center in your brain and you feel happy. So you can use your physicality to affect your mental state. And yoga instructors know this. So I was talking to a lady about 10 years ago in Auckland who was a yoga instructor, and we were talking about these sorts of concepts, and she said, yeah, well if I see someone that's sort of like this in the standing pose, I'll go up to them and I'll open them up and get them to stand there and then get them to tell me how they feel. Like if I'm like this, what are you thinking I'm feeling? Pretty closed in, maybe a bit tense, maybe a bit depressed. And if I'm like this, pretty open and confident. And you can affect that mental state again through that physicality. We actually had a student, it might have been earlier this year, a nutrition student who'd done a lot of drama and acting, and she said they actually use poses and expressions and hold them prior to a shoot to get them into the mental state that reflects what they're going to be acting. So all these connections that are starting to come out in science and be put into practice. Okay, any questions or comments on that so far? I'm going to throw lots of concepts at you, so we're going to weave our way through it. Okay, so why is it that two people can have a different view of events? So you've got two people that are at the same thing, you're asking them to recollect what happened, and they talk about different stuff. What's it?
Priorities,
Yeah.
perspectives.
Yep, perspective is the key word that we're going to look at.
Past experiences and things
Yes.
I've been through.
Yeah. Exactly. And those past experiences form belief systems. So our mind's not one thing. I mean, we know we have one thing in our brain saying this and another saying that at times, and we're trying to work out what to do. We're this enormous matrix of belief systems, and they develop as we develop through our experience, our expectations of family environment, friends, culture, race, society, religion. All of these things form us. And most of you have probably heard that it's the first 2 years that the key behavioural patterns of children form. I think I've got it on the next page. No, I don't. One through. When you're born, something like 90-95% of the frontal brain, the human brain, all the neurons are there, but it's basically unwired. So the neurons are kind of sitting there waiting, floating about for experiences. And through experiences, the brain joins up and goes, oh, that connects to that. I did that, mum did that, so spiders are dangerous, so I'll connect that. And in a way that the baby goes. And to the point where there's a book called Parenting from the Inside Out, which we'll come to, and the neurobiologist that wrote that states that if a parent gets a child, an adoptive parent gets a child at birth, that you can call the parents biological parents because the brain hardwires itself under their influence. So that's a pretty huge statement. And so that's what's going on in these first couple of years of life. All these connections are being made. And we'll have a little bit more of a look at that. But back to belief systems, just a quote here to sort of reflect that our image of the world around us, which we carry in our head, is just a model. Nobody in his head imagines all the world, government or country, and you could add to that the same as everyone else as well, has a selection of concepts, relationships between them, that she uses to represent the real world. So we're going to explore this and this ideas of belief systems and perception. So we have all these belief systems and we each experience things depending on our perspective, and that depends on our upbringing and all the impacts that we've had. Some of the language we have, you see the glass half full, someone else sees it half empty, view the rose has thorns. These sort of things, or these sayings in our language are reflecting how people can see things very differently in the same situation. It's all about our perception and what we've experienced in our recent lives. So if we have a look at this from a science perspective, without looking down, or if you haven't looked down, take a guess at how much of what you see comes through the eyes. So ignoring the other four senses, how much of what you're seeing right now in class comes through your eyes? It's a funny question.
I already looked.
Who hasn't looked? Take a stab. You know it's not 100 because the question wouldn't be posed if it was 100.
Why do you think or something?
It is. Well, the current estimate is 10 to 20%. So thinking along the lines that we're just talking around our mental models and belief systems, where's the rest coming from? Yeah. So it's coming from our memories, our expectations, our beliefs, what we think should be happening. And so what happens is the visual data comes in through your eyes, but most of what you actually perceive is the brain adding a whole lot of overlay. The other 80-90% is it going, well, I've seen this before, and it looked like that, and this is what to expect, and it fills in the picture for you. So, got some quotes down here from some journals. The environment might look literally different to different people. It's possible for core affective circuitry, so this is mainly the limbic part of the brain, to select the contents of consciousness. So the information from the brain centres is integrated with visual processing and gives you an image, and the brain fills in the picture. Now, you might think that's really strange, but it's very useful. So, tell how old I am by the fact that it was fifth form science. And I don't know the years these days. But did anyone do the thing with the blind spot where you went out and all of a sudden the tip of the pen disappeared? And so what happened? Can you remember why that happened? No? So where the nerve leaves the back of your eye, there can't be receptors there because there's a nerve on the way that's leaving to take all that information to your brain. But you don't then see this blank spot where the nerve is out of each eye floating around. Your brain goes, oh, I can just put together the image through all the other data I've gotten through my experiences previously, it looks about like this, and it fills it in and gives you a seamless vision. So with that idea, this is what the brain's doing for everything else. And so if we think of a 6-month-old, for the parents, what do they do when they find this chair for the very first time?
Pull up on
What's that?
it. Pull themselves up.
Yep. Anything else? So that's touch. They're probably going to bite it and suck it for quite a while. If it had a noise, they'd press the button and listen to it over and over and over. So they're experiencing it from the 5 senses because they don't have all these past experiences and expectations to fill in for the picture for them yet. They've still got to develop all those. And so they will spend half an hour completely investigating this. But when I come along to that chair in class in front of you, I don't sort of have to get down and have a good look. I know I can come along, it's on wheels, so I have to go straight down, sit down while I'm still talking, because the brain's filling in all that other data for me so that I don't need to be that intensely focused visually and through touch to be able to sit down on this chair. So the brain's filling in all this information for us so that we can more effectively move through the world and do our stuff. So we're not getting overloaded, and kids with some developmental stuff, autism for instance, they can get completely fixated on things and they do get really overloaded by this information. They don't seem to filter out or have filter in all the other information. They get really locked in on what they're doing. So I don't have a percentage for how much is filled in by the other 4 senses, but even if you said that 50% of the other senses is filled in by the brain, then half of your reality is what you expect it to be. We're going to link this back to biology in a minute. So the flip side of it, filling in the picture so that I can sit down comfortably without falling off and looking silly, is that if you've just seen a scary movie, you've gone to the pictures and you're walking down the street at night and it's a bit windy and you see a tree waving around, and your brain goes and forms a human form, and you look again after you get that shunt of adrenaline and it's just a tree, your brain's filling in the picture for you but in an unhealthy manner or an unuseful manner. So there's this flip side, there's the good and the bad, and so then bringing this back to the gazelle and the human, the gazelle can use these sort of responses and stress responses in the brain in a healthy, natural way that allows it to survive in the wild. But we have all these layers on our brain that can cause us to get stressed and affect biology, and we can have difficulty letting go of stuff because of all our past experiences. So I've already said this bit. So how we experience the world is to a greater or less degree probably greater what we expect it to be. And so then you get to things like people talking about positive affirmations and how you're presenting yourself and how you're choosing to see the world and select what your responses and what your thought processes are to try and overcome some of these belief systems and patterning that might not be so useful. So as an example to illustrate this, imagine you've got 2 students coming to workshop. The first one's had some major crisis in their life and they called up their key tutor who offered them heaps of health suggestions and maybe sent them out at home botanical and then put them through to Kimmy and organised an extension, and they're feeling really supported. The second one maybe had the wrong module pack sent out and then they started the wrong course and it wasted them 2 weeks and then something else happened. So imagine these 2 students then turning up to a classroom, say it's this classroom, and I'm half an hour late, maybe not half an hour, so let's say 10 minutes late. The person that's been really supported and is feeling like we do a good job and we're there for them is much more likely to go, oh well, something quite real must have happened, maybe his kid's got chicken pox which might have just getting over, it's 10 minutes, doesn't matter. The one who's quite irritated or annoyed by some administrative errors that might have happened is much more likely to be sitting there going, it's a bit typical of this place, So you can see how the same situation of a tutor being 10 minutes late can be seen completely differently depending on the mind frame, and that mind frame is built up from previous experience. Does that all make sense? Has anyone got any questions around it? So we have lots of sayings that encapsulate these sorts of things. So if we put rose in here, you're seeing through rose-tinted glasses or coloured glasses. What does that mean? Sorry, there's some whispers.
Sees everything. Lovely.
Everything's rosy, everything's lovely, they're quite possibly fallen in love and everything's going good. But you might be sitting there as their friend going, this is the fourth guy she's gone out with, it's got that same pattern. But the person at that stage is maybe just fully in the space of love and not seeing this other stuff going on. So these are examples of language that describes us having these beliefs or mental filters that impact on how we see the world. He's unable to hear what I'm saying, ladies. Not to excuse guys, but thinking of these examples, if say 50% of what you hear comes in through your ears, and the other 50% is your experiences, belief systems, expectations, is it possible that the person that can't hear you actually mentally can't hear you? That they're not willfully choosing to not hear you, but their experience is not allowing them to process that and get what you mean and hear what you're saying. So you start to see how these things also impact on our relationships and how we work together. Why can't you see what I mean? What filters have they got on their vision? So lots of ideas around how we perceive things and how much comes in through the senses and how much our brain fills in for us. Makes up, if you like, through experience. So a belief colours how we see the world through the five senses. It impacts on our processing of visual information, touch, taste, smell, hearing. If a belief system or expectation is in conflict with the world around us, then it can cause stress at some level. So if you imagine two friends walking down the street at night after a scary movie, and maybe they're in a bit of a dark alley getting through the cars. One has had totally happy parents that are like, oh, everything's synchronicity, everything's okay, life's good and fine, and it's all meant to happen. And one's had the strangers, don't talk to strangers, you're not safe, the world's not safe, be careful, come home, lock the door, these sorts of concepts. Which one's going to be more triggered by walking down a dark alleyway? Quite possibly the second one, because they're primed to be worried and fearful for things. So belief systems that have been impregnated on their brain through that family environment and cultural and social as well, may just well cause that person to be stressed and shut down the immune, the digestive and the reproductive to some degree while she walks down that alleyway, while the other person might be quite fine. Maybe, slightly nervous but generally fine. So this is one example of thousands upon thousands of little belief systems we hold. And that might be that, that green's nicer than that green, it doesn't have to be this big concept. But some of them are triggered without us even noticing and cause us stress and impact on these different body systems. And if there's enough of those stresses, then things start to go downhill. Maybe allergies develop, maybe digestive function, maybe they get a stomach ulcer. You start to see how stress and our mental state can start impacting their physical health. Maybe they can't get pregnant, they've been trying for a long time, and then that, of course, further compounds the stress. So coming back to this, to pull it all together for where we are now, we've got these mental models, beliefs, issues that really develop through childhood, hence the arrow going this way. Particularly in that first 2 years as we're impacted by our family and wider social environment. And a big part of being an adult seems to be trying to go this other way and let go of stuff and work through stuff and become clearer and more present in these sorts of concepts. But we have these mental models impacting on our mind and how we perceive things, and depending on those and what's going on in our environment, they can cause stress and impact on the body. So we're starting to see that actually this mind-body stuff is quite concrete, and that there's direct links between our mental state, the health of our mind, our belief systems, all of these things with our physical health. So coming back to Candace Pert and her research, she started out very, what's the word? I don't know what the word, not conservative, but very, very normal scientific research. But as her learning and her discoveries developed, she came to a belief that if you leave a mental emotional issue long enough, it will arise as a physical symptom, and that physical symptom is directly related to that particular mental emotional belief. So now you've got a scientist crossing the bridge between the impact of belief systems on our perception, this sort of thing, to what's more commonly thought of as Louise Hay type stuff, which does get in the more fluffy realm for a lot of people. So for anyone who hasn't read any Louise Hay, in some of her books she has lists of this mental emotional belief issue is often related to this physical condition going on. So we're going to look at this concept a little bit. And we're going to start with language. So what does I have butterflies in my tummy mean?
Nervous or anxious?
Yep. In Western medicine, what has anxiety got to do with the stuff? So we've got language relating emotion to an organ, which Western medicine doesn't do, but in our language we've got this association. What does his shitty liver mean? Smiles, people know. What does it mean?
Angry.
Angry? Yep. What has anger got to do with the liver?
The liver's kind of overloaded and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yep, it's easy to get angry. So waking up feeling angry and irritable or grumpy after while you're hungover, there's probably not too many people in this room that haven't had that. So there's this classical picture of the angry alcoholic that's always irritable and angry and grumpy. So in Chinese medicine, they relate different emotions to different organs, and anger is related to the liver. And if you overload the liver through alcohol, which it has to physically process and detoxify and pass out, it is more easy to be angry. He or she has heartache. Who's actually had physical pain when there's a relationship stuff going on, a breakup or something? You can get a really pinching tight. But again, in our Western medicine, we don't associate an emotional state with physical discomfort. There's a weight on my shoulders. What does that mean? Burdened. We're carrying the world on our shoulders. So we have this concept in our language that burden and responsibility, when perhaps not so positively held, or responsibility not so positively held, becomes burden, and that it affects our shoulders. And when we're in that state, we do get all tight through the shoulders. But once again, our Western medicine model doesn't have any direct correlation between the concept of burden and having to carry something and push on through and physical ailment. But our language has the wisdom in it, and it's developed over time. So we have all these sayings which directly state, really, or maybe slightly indirectly state, that a body part is directly impacted by a state of mind or by an emotional state. And as Chinese medicine, they take that a few steps forward and say, well, if someone's got reproductive issues, might there be relationship issues around sensuality, sexuality, around having kids, not wanting to be like their mum? And when we're looking at these concepts in a body talk class, my tutor said to us, well, pretty much everyone that comes into your clinic who has a UTI is going to be pissed off. So in Chinese medicine, the meridian for liver and anger comes down, wraps around the genitals and goes down the legs. And when someone's angry and irritable, it's the energy in that meridian is lowered, and it therefore impacts where it travels, and it travels around the genitals. And through that weakness can then allow an infection to come in. And that's about the time when we all went, oh yeah, close up, this is challenging. And what he said to us, which I'll reiterate or say to you, is with these sort of concepts, the only way to make it real for yourself is to try and observe them yourself. And so when he told me this, it was not long before I opened up a body talk clinic, and every person that came in with a UTI, which is, or had one recently, which is, quite common, I would ask them as part of the process, not directly when they said a UTI, are you angry? But, I'd bring it into the consult, and every single one of them said, yes, they had some issues, and generally it was with a partner, and they were pissed off. Some of them, or a couple of them, said no to start with, and they came back for the next session and was like, what I was thinking about it, and there is this pattern that when I'm pissed off or irritable with the partner, the UTI comes in. So, not to say that it's always one-to-one, and that's always going to cause that, but when you see this sort of thing in clinic, it gives you an opportunity to start asking some questions for that person to see what mental emotional picture might be going on. If you've looked at this sort of stuff and the relationship of different body parts with different or different disorders, we should say, with different mental emotional states. And again, you have to question it for yourself. You have to make it real for yourself, because otherwise, some of the earlier stuff I said, there's science behind it. This sort of stuff's starting to get into the not quite validated by science field. So I have a degree in microbiology, and I always come back to the state when I'm talking about this to help people remember that science is the study of what we don't know yet. It's the study of finding new knowledge. So science doesn't have all the answers, it's trying to find them. But there's healthy skepticism and there's unhealthy skepticism, and I think in a reasonably large portion of the scientific community, the skepticism is so strong that any new concepts that don't fit their current model, even though they're trying to work out stuff that we don't understand yet, gets thrown out the window. So I just recommend keeping an open mind and trying to make it real for yourself by observing it in your own clinic as you go along, or doing some reading, which there's lots of books at the end. So at an intuitive level, and in our language, we have these sayings like there's a weight on my shoulders, but in traditional systems, there is this direct connection. So we all know that when we've got butterflies in the stomach, we're anxious. And the next step is it impacts on our digestive system. So who's tried to have a meal when they're really worried and stressed out? And what did it do? Sat there, not much happening. Why? There's no blood going to your stomach and your intestines. It's all being shunted through the stress to your muscles, to your skeletal muscles, to run and fight. And there's actually not the blood to make the enzymes and the nutrients to digest your food. So there's some logical connections as well, but traditional systems take it a step further than that. So as an example of the power of the mind and connections, another Kaimi story. There was a 4-year-old boy in the States who had just been given an ice cream, and he was about to cross the road, and he was just going to bite into the ice cream, and a car right in front of him hit and killed a dog. Bite. That child developed a dairy allergy pretty much then and there, and had it for quite a while. What's happening in the brain when that happens? We've got trauma, death, dog hit by car, ice cream. The brain's wiring up and it's making connections there. That doesn't always, it's not 100%, it's not like everyone who sees something traumatic while they're eating ice cream is going to develop dairy allergy, but it did in this case. And it took until the 4th session when they got back to this trauma and did some release work around it. And when it was released, his dairy allergy dissipated over the next couple of weeks and was gone. So, sometimes it's just the brain wiring up a traumatic event and unfortunately associating it, in this case, with food. Why all dairy then became an allergy and not just ice cream, I can't tell you. But it's an example of the power of the mind to, I don't know if create illness is the right word, the right way to put it, but for illness to come about of a connection that's not useful to the brain or to the body. But also the reverse, that it can be unraveled and let go of. So I mentioned this earlier, these are just examples to try and frame ideas, but not everyone with a liver problem has anger as a cause. It might just be part of the picture. We are much more complex and there's a whole lot of interconnected things going on. However, if there's a really strong picture in a client, this might just give you a place to start exploring their relationships, their mental emotional state, what's going on for them, to see if there is some sort of connection there. And if you see that there might be something there, you might work with something like flower essences to help work with that, or you might actually just go, well, right, while I'm working with you, because you've got this stuff going on, I want you to go and see this NLP practitioner or this counsellor or psychiatrist, or whatever it might be. So, just to delve into these connections of mind body a little bit more, without looking down, if you're a reader-header, thinking along these lines of a mental emotional state and an organ. So we've got the digestive system. What impact on the digestive system, or what mental emotional state might cause digestive system dysfunction?
Anxiety and
Yeah.
depression.
Yeah.
Great.
What are the two extremes of the digestive system? Constipation, you all know what that means, and diarrhea. So when someone says don't be so constipated, what do they mean? Excuse my language, stop holding on to your shit, let go. So again, we have this language that's talking about holding on, and when we are physically, mentally holding on, the body can do that as well, it can mirror it. So as an example, I travelled around India for 6 months many years ago, and I was doing some voluntary work, and there was an American lady there at the same time, and she had fallen in love with a local Indian guy, and she was due to leave. So she'd done a volunteer stint, and she was, I don't know if she was going home or going somewhere else, I can't remember. But within a week of supposedly going, she got constipated, and she didn't go for a week. And up until then she was completely fine. And she was going to the doctor and trying different drugs and natural remedies, because they tend to be more incorporated into their health system over there. And nothing was working, and she was holding on, she couldn't decide what to do, And the night she decided to go and let go of it, and actually this was probably just a holiday thing, what happened? She got up 3 or 4 times in the night and had big evacuations. Her body let go. And the flip side of that, sometimes when people are just in this, they've had some big life experiences and everything just feels really out of control, they can get really loose bowel motions. And I've noticed this for myself in a smaller degree, that you have those times when you're waking up for a couple of hours and you have a bad night's sleep, and you do it 2 or 3 nights in a row, and then eventually you wake up and go, all right, what am I not thinking about, what am I not getting here? And as you spend a bit of time, get up or whatever, and work out what's troubling you that you haven't quite grasped with your conscious mind. What I've noticed is when I finally do that and I'm able to let go of whatever it is, when I get up in the morning I have a loose emotion. And there's no other explanation for it. I haven't had a curry, and I haven't, got food poisoning or anything else, and it's just once and then it's gone. But again, until I had these sort of concepts introduced to me, why would I ever join the dots between just being up for a couple of hours and let this thing go and loose motion? You'd never stop to think in the toilet, I wonder if this is related to me letting go and the physical body. So there's absolutely no reason for you to join the dots if you have never been exposed to these concepts. So now that you are, I challenge you to try and connect them. If something's going on repeatedly for you, see if you can work out, well, what's been going on in my social life, in my relationships, and whatever areas as well that may be related to what's going on for me. And if we look at the stomach, we've touched on worry, thinking, anxiety. You can also broaden that to ideas of digesting life, what's going on for you. So when I was travelling around Scotland, in Wales, I got quite bad candida, and I didn't know what it was to start with until someone knowledgeable who'd been through it sort of pointed me in the way of a library and a book on candida. And what had happened is I had just spent 6 months working for Otago University in kind of what should have been the dream job in a cancer lab, and left it. And I just left a 3.5-year relationship, and I'd sold everything I owned except 2 small boxes of certificates from school, class photos, that sort of thing, and I'd up and gone overseas. And I was having real trouble digesting and processing what was going on in my life, and concurrently, and through the stress of that as well, I developed candida. And it wasn't until that was a trigger for me to get into a lot better eating, so nutrition and yoga and meditation and a whole lot of things around the edges to try and work it, and I could maintain it just if I didn't eat any sugar or even any fruit, that sort of thing. But it wasn't until I went to a mind body practitioner in Wellington about 10, 11 years ago that we got down to some of this other stuff that I was really having trouble processing and letting go of, that the candida finally just went, and within a month not even a month, less, I could eat a completely normal diet again. Anyone else had similar sorts of experiences or can relate to any of these? Got a little quiet nod.
I had a neighbour, I was sitting outside with my laptop studying on Saturday morning, and I think it was maybe about 18, 19 years old, and this kid was, there was a fence, he was just losing the plot. He was telling his father to hit him, and it was really intense. He was smashing stuff. He was, he was a young kid, but I get really bad allergies, and like my heart, I was sitting there, my heart was beating. I was thinking, because he was coming up to the fence, looking at me and kicking a ball, and I was kind of trying to ignore him. And within about an hour after that, I went back inside. I got the runny nose and the allergies. It's like an attack that I get from time to time. Just full on, and I said to my wife, that was it. As it happened, I could feel the cortisol, I could feel the adrenaline. I was like, oh no, not again. And that was it.
That triggered it off.
Yeah.
So there's a really direct response, and you
But then it
realise
lasts,
at the
then it
time.
lasts for 2 days. That allergies.
Yeah. So a few other examples of that sort of thing. I had a body talk client who seemingly out of nowhere developed bloating, gas, food intolerance / allergies. I don't know if they were allergies or not. And the state she was in was, she was 40. Her partner that she was really in love with and did really well with had teenage kids and didn't want more children. She didn't have kids. She was sick of her career and her house wasn't selling. And she really, really wanted to have kids. And so she came to a place where she had to decide whether she left someone she really loved to have children, or whether she stayed with them and gave up the idea of having her own kids. And it was at this time that all this digestive stuff developed, and she was having trouble processing life and what's going on and what choices she needed to make. And so again, she got into good nutrition and cutting things out. But it wasn't until she finally made the call that she was going to leave him that really rapidly after that all her symptoms resolved, within a handful of days. And she got clear and she processed everything, and her digestive system went back to processing food as it should do. Case 2 is not really one person, it's lots of people that I've seen, and we probably can all relate to it, is the comfort eating. Now when we're going for sweet foods, what are we doing? What are we after?
Something to make you happy.
Yeah, sweetness. We're after sweetness, whether that's could be through some other thing like a hug from a partner, or someone calling up a best friend and sharing half an hour on the phone, or whatever it is. We're craving something that's not met and we go for sweetness. And I know if I've had a really flat out day and I've hardly stopped for breaks, to get home, and there's 2 kids to put to bed, and then there's the clean up, and you get to 9 o'clock and go, 5 minutes to bed sort of thing. Sweetness, you end up in the fridge going, and it's not like an enormous binge, but because I'm familiar with these sorts of concepts, I notice myself going for the sweet stuff in that sort of space. And I think we all to a greater or lesser degree, for some people it really gets quite out of control for them and they have real trouble with it. So my question there for clients would be, you know, what do they need for themselves? Is it time out? Is it attention of loved ones? Is it recognition for what they do? And that's common with mums who are always giving to everyone else. And as in a personal example of these sort of things, I've just been to one of the classes around this sort of stuff, and my wife's a naturopath and she studied body talk as well. And we both got sweet cravings after dinner. We're like, all right, so the theory here is, you know, there's some need not being met. And so we put on some music and we had a little dance and we tried to, or we did, nourish each other. And as soon as, you know, that was only for 5 minutes, but as soon as we stopped and checked in, it's like, no sweet cravings. So again, you've just really got to try it for yourself and make it real for yourself, because otherwise this stuff's all abstract. So just to sum up all of these concepts, 2 things. Our body tells a story. It's a reflection of all we've done, been, learned, experienced. Our beliefs, attitudes, diet, lifestyle, everything that makes us us is reflected in our physicality. It's got a lot to teach us if we're ready to listen. When I look at my life and the times when my learning and personal growth has accelerated, that's when I've got really sick and I've hit a wall and I've had to stop and look at my life and go, well, what's not working here? You know, what choices am I not making that I need to? That I've got to a state where I've got this health stuff going on. Can anyone else relate to that? They've hit that wall, and that's when they've had to look around. You know, that's when you might start with a doctor, and then you might see a nutritionist, and you might see a counsellor at the same time, and you start searching and learning and growing. And through that process, letting go of beliefs and attitudes, and changing your diet, and going to yoga, and whatever else you find that works for you. It's those times, and to me, poor health, when you see that sort of process, you see that poor health, when you recognise it as this, can be a really great opportunity for change. And you know, when I get something going on now, it's a little bit harder when you've got kids and you're really busy, but you know, it's taking the time to stop and reflect and see what you need can often nip what is coming in the bud really quickly. Flus, for instance. So there's an example over the page where I had a friend at university who got himself into a bit of trouble and ended up on heroin. And from there ended up on methadone, which if anyone knows is a lot stronger than heroin and really hard to get off. And he's been on it, I actually haven't seen him for a long time, it's part of the story. But he was on it for a long time, and when people are in that space and they start to do silly things for money, the friendships tend to start going the wayside and the family members start giving up. And you know, so I really tried to support this person. And I helped him get into rehab, which unfortunately he skipped out of, and not long after that, for some reason he called up Kelly's phone. I don't even know how he had the number. But she came outside, I just moved to New Plymouth, and she said, "It's Mark," put the phone down beside me, and I looked at it for, it was probably only 15 seconds, but it felt like 10 minutes. And I turned it off. And in a really short period of time, maybe within an hour, I had quite a sore throat. What's the throat about? Communication, speaking the truth, whether that's to yourself or someone else. And I sat on it for 2 days, I had this sore throat, and I knew that's what it was about. But I was feeling pretty scared and pretty disappointed with my response to what had happened. So eventually I got up the gumption and I called him up. And I apologised for not talking to him. And then I said to him, look, the only time you call me up is when you need money or help, and it's actually not serving you and it's not serving me. And our friendship, there's not really anything left of it, it's just this need relationship. And actually that's it, you know, I can't be your friend anymore. Really hard to do, never had to do it since. And ended the call, and within about half an hour the sore throat was gone. I had spoken what I needed to speak. Now sometimes you're just exhausted and you're busy and you get an infection. It's not always going to be this big metaphysical experience for you. But often there is layers here that you can work on if you can catch yourself early on with something coming up and experiment with it. And you know, to the way I frame health, I knew that was going on, and when I finally made the call and spoke it, it disappeared. You know, I actually really get anything in my throat even, because I've got a lot better at communicating to myself and to the people around me, and speaking what I need to speak. And thinking of speaking, This was in a Body Talk forum many years ago. Someone put up this little saying, our body speaks our minds because our issues get stuck in our tissues. And those few words really well sum up all of these concepts, that our body is fully integrated with all of us, well, that it's not a separate thing really, and that everything we do and experience, it's all reflected in our health. So, to recap on that, back to the start, we've got that stress triggers the sympathetic nervous system, shuts down digestive, immune, reproductive, and impacts on the others as well. We've looked at this idea that belief systems and our past experiences, our perceptions, expectations, all affect how we sense and interact with the world. So only 10 to 20% of what we see comes through our eyes, the rest we make up. In a really often quite accurate way. You know, I'm not seeing all sorts of crazy morphing people in front of me, but the brain's filling in a lot of the picture for me. We have metaphors in our language that reflect this sort of thing, that there is a mind-body connection and that there is a connection between specific concepts and specific body parts. So there's a weight on my shoulders, I'm broken-hearted. What was the level one there? That's an angry, alcoholic, irritable person. Shitty-livered, sorry. Yes, the one, thank you. So we have these metaphors in our language that are directly in line with what a lot of, if not all, traditional systems have in them. So if you look at core ones like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, these things are just part of how they see it. They've never had good reason to separate out mind and body. And if you read about it, there's some pretty strong theories that roughly sort of 130, 140 years ago, when science was starting to develop as a profession, that there actually was a time when the church came in and said, hey, nah, mind, body, spirit stuff is us, this is our place and this is the power and knowledge we hold. You scientists can deal with the physical. And so in Western culture, there's been quite a strong separation between body and mind, emotion stuff. For a long time, it's only just starting to come back together now. But traditional systems never had this split. They just observed, you know. Chinese medicine has observed for thousands and thousands of years. When someone comes in with this and this physical ailment, often they're in this emotional state, this mental state going on as well. So they just see a collection of symptoms together and have no need to separate the physical and the mind out. It's just part of how to do things. But again, as I mentioned earlier, it's cyclical. It's not that it's all mind impacting on body. The body also impacts on the mind. So if you've drunk too much alcohol the night before, it's really easy to get irritable. And hold the smile for a minute and you actually trigger the happiness centers in your brain and start feeling happy. So there's this cyclical arrangement or connection between the two. So if we come back to this one, what's been added in here is the idea that particular belief systems, mental models, issues can cause ultimately particular changes in the body. And in Western medicine, the area where this has been elucidated quite well is stuff like Natasha McBride's ADHD, autism type stuff related to gut dysbiosis, leading to leaky gut and immune responses to food particles, all that sort of stuff. So what does this mean for you? Because obviously you're studying nutrition, you're not studying mind body stuff. Well, some people are ready enough to be in front of you and to come and have a session, but they're not actually totally ready and they can't necessarily hear all the stuff you've got to tell them. They don't want to know that they shouldn't have 4 coffees in the morning, or that they need to reduce their wine because they're having a bottle a night, or whatever it might be. So people won't always be able to hear you, but you can plant the seed for them. And it's not uncommon to talk to natural health practitioners who have a client that's a no-show for a follow-up, and they start questioning themselves and what didn't I do right? Was it too much for them? This and that, and then they bump into that client down the street 6 months later, and they come up to them and say, I wasn't ready. I couldn't hear what you were saying then, but about a month ago, I cut out this and this, and I added in this, and this symptom's gone, and this symptom's gone, but I haven't got really headaches. Can I come and see you? And walks in. It's really common, but The first response from the practitioner is often to judge themselves and question themselves. Similarly, clients won't always see what you mean, but they may reflect on your words later. Some clients won't be able to reach out to you. They're ready enough to book in, but in that consult, they'll just be all like this and trying to sort of block out because part of them really doesn't want to hear the stuff they know that they need to start doing for their own health. So it's recognising stuff at this level as well. And this last one's really me speaking how I see health. Some clients won't understand that their healing is their own responsibility. It's not going to the doctor to get a pill to fix my asthma, owning the asthma. It's their own process and their own journey. And that the practitioner sits alongside and can help educate them to take the steps they need to take. Their health is profoundly affected by their belief systems and attitudes. Our bodies teach us things about ourselves if we're ready to listen. You're there supporting their learning. And some clients will have their physical symptoms disappear. Basically, you could give them a vial of water and tell them it was B12 or whatever, and things are just resolved. And there are people that are so ready, that are so on the cusp for getting better and making changes already, and they just need it validated by someone really, and they need to be heard and listened to and have agreement on where they're going. And again, another sore throat thing. So when we were in Auckland, Kelly had a clinic up there, and she had a client that got repeated throat infections, and it wasn't until the second or third session that Kelly felt comfortable enough to sort of drill in and say, well look, you're always getting this throat stuff, and you told me that your manager really stands on you and that you need to speak stuff to them. Do you think there might be a connection here with that? I really recommend that you go and talk to this person and deal with that issue. And she did, and all the throat stuff dissipated. And they were doing lots of good stuff which would have been helping, with good nutrients and cutting out allergens and whatever else they did in their treatment plan. But she was just on the cusp, and she just needed to be heard and reflected something simple like that. So be a good listener, be a good mirror back. You do flower instances in the training, which is quite rare for a nutrition course, and it can be really powerful for working with people, particularly kids. Some people might want to go off and do other training and have other skill sets. So one of our first ever nutrition graduates went off and did the GAPS training, Natasha McBride in Australia. And so now she's specialising in sort of mind-body nutrition stuff. So you may find other things that you want to add into what you learn with us. And of course referrals, there's nothing wrong with recognising that there is a core issue related to what's going on for people, and for me it's really important to know all the practitioners that are around in your community, whether that's knowing a massage therapist because they're just too stressed and need to relax and that's affecting their digestion, or whether it's an acupuncturist or a counsellor. I think it's quite important that you get to know the people in your community and build your business as well, because you're going to be referring back and forwards to each other. And as you work with people via diet, you'll find for some people, depending on their picture, that their mental emotional states start to naturally shift too. So again, thinking of the Natasha McBride stuff, when you're using probiotics and healing the gut, and the gut's in a better space, and the microbes in your gut, as well as the nervous system in your gut, releases a lot of chemicals that affect your brain as well. So all of this work is also going to help balance their mental emotional state just by getting them strong and healthy, and having a nutrient-dense diet is all going to help. So as a health professional, you're studying nutrition, you focus there, and obviously nutrition is really core. It doesn't matter if I'm meditating all day, if I'm not eating really well, I'm probably not going to be doing very well as well. It's really cool stuff. What I wanted to show or bring up in this class is that we are really complex, and people will have a whole lot of issues going on, that even though you think they're coming for nutrition advice, there'll be these mental emotional patterns that will naturally just end up sitting in front of you on the desk with you. And as you develop, you will become a counsellor, you will become a mentor for people, a life coach, depending how you practice. Because again, people come with their physical ailments, but they come with all their other stuff as well. And it's useful to have some concepts that these are all tied in. Again, whether that's you working with them or working in part and also having a counsellor or a theta healer or whatever you might be into. And there's more reading. If this sort of stuff is intriguing and you want to read some more, this is just a little taste. This is really just me saying, hey, this, in my health journey, this is where I've come to. This is what I think is really core for a lot of people and part of the bigger picture. Most of the things I've mentioned today is on here. I haven't mentioned the web that has no weaver. It's sort of the introduction TCM, Chinese nursing book, if anyone's interested in that. Candace Pert, the guy that talked about adoptive parents being biological parents, co-wrote Parenting from the Inside Out. Really interesting book, if any parents or parents-to-be want to read it. It's the only parenting book I read that was completely focused on the parents sorting out their own issues so they can pass them on to their kids. It's not about, right, manage this behaviour, do that, or to get a sleeping pattern, do this. It was about the parents, which I really loved. Richard Moats, like Louise Hay, in terms of running seminars, looking at the connection of different disorders to body parts, to mental states, body talk. And this list would go on and on and on. And as I've said a couple of times with the massage down here at the bottom, it goes both ways, It's not uncommon to talk to massage therapists who have had people have a complete meltdown on their table. I had it with a student in my class when I was at Wellpark College, and I got up around her heart, and she just burst into the biggest sobs. She could hardly breathe, sort of sobs. And through supporting her and going through that process, found out that there's huge relationship stuff going on, and working around the heart just treated it off for her. So it's physical as well. It's both ways. So any questions, comments? Too many ideas at once? If anyone wants to have a chat about this stuff, I'll hang around for a little bit, or you're welcome to call up at any stage. But if it does tickle your fancy, I really recommend just going and reading some books and exploring more and getting to know some practitioners around that you might be able to refer to. The greatest way to do that is to go and have a couple of sessions with them and get a feel for what they do. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.